is real. Listen. Hi, I'm Traci.
And I'm Kathy.
And this is Curious Explorers. Hey, Kath.
Hey, Trace. How are you?
All right, how you doing?
I'm good.
Well, good to see you, as
Good
always.
to see you.
As you know, I uploaded our clips, our audio clips that I would consider EVPs. I
Right.
understand that there are people who would hold them to such a high standard that they wouldn't consider them EVPs.
Yeah, I think, well, you can say they're anomalous. I mean, no matter what, they're anomalous. I think it's hard because there's no discernible words in it. And a lot of people, when you're talking about electronic voice phenomena, it's something that's very identifiable as a voice. But, but they're definitely not easily explained.
No.
So yeah.
So just a quick backstory for people before we get into our actual real topic of the evening. We were recording a series of demonically themed podcast episodes. There were a few in a row. And as we've said previously, more than once, we had a lot of weird electronic phenomena at the time. You and I both had fairly new computers that we had to replace, which was
Right.
crazy. There was nothing we could do. We had weird electronic stuff turn on when there was no one near it. Anyway, I'm not making a great case for it, but it was just really strange. And we thought, oh, could it be the subject matter? So then a few weeks later, when you were going through some of your audio, there were all of these anomalies. So I believe that at least two of the recordings, you can hear what is a word.
Mm-hmm. I also have a lot of mirrors in here, and mirrors are considered amplifiers of energy.
And I want people to go to our YouTube if they normally get this on one of their audio-only platforms and check it out. I don't know. I mean, it'd be interesting to see what people think. But the creepiest one is the longest one. It absolutely sounds like a voice. It just seems like I can't make out what it's saying. I want to know what people think.
I would argue, though, to listen to it without looking at video. You know what I mean? So you're really getting it as an audio only, and to try and turn it up and forget the subject matter, forget where it was or anything like that, and just listen for the cadence of a voice and see if you can come up with. I remember hearing it and I remember being like, oh, I don't know if I should share this with I was like, I thought, oh, cool, that's really cool, and then I was just like, I'm not sure I should share it with Tracy because she's gonna get scared.
Oh my God, Kathy. You're like, okay, I'm just going to go to bed above this
Well,
place
that's
where
it.
I
I was like, I'll
recorded
just
this.
turn that off.
Oh my God.
I know I was recording it near Blue, and I actually think we were talking about Blue. But
yes.
But yeah, no, I thought that was funny. I'd be very interested to hear what people have to say too, and what they hear in it. But like I said, I would get headphones on. I would turn, and these are not like, let me see if I can hear it. Like, you
It's
can hear
unmistakable.
it. It's loud. It's just a question of whether or not you can discern, a word out of it. It definitely does sound like a voice, though. It definitely sounds like something communicating.
And just to be clear, there are 4 clips that I uploaded. 2 or 3, I mean, one just sounds like a human to me making a sound, but it's not a human because it wasn't either of us.
Right.
Or maybe not quite a human making a sound. The other 2 absolutely sound like somebody saying a specific word. And then the last one was this protracted, it sounded like garbled speech to me.
Right.
But we heard none of this.
No,
at
none of
all
it,
while
and
recording.
it's truly electronic phenomena because it was not heard. There's some people tend to lump any kind of sound bites that they get into EVP, but the whole idea is like there is a disembodied voice, there's sound anomalies. Electronic voice phenomena is a very specific thing. It is a voice captured on an audio device that has not been discerned by the naked ear, for lack of a better word, a better way of putting it, but also um usually it is in response to some kind of conversation. So it's usually in response to a question. So it's not just ambient kind of noise that you're capturing. And so I would be interested to hear what people think it is, because while we weren't doing an EVP session, we weren't asking questions, we were having a conversation though. I also have a lot of mirrors in here, and mirrors are considered amplifiers of energy. And
Oh,
this was
yeah.
recorded as almost part of the conversation that we were having.
Oh, 100%. So let us know. And just again, a little background. I had posted a post, it's a little redundant, on our YouTube channel asking people, like, do you want to hear this? And
Right.
76% of people said, absolutely. What do we got to lose? How bad could it be? And 24% were like, God, please no.
Which is funny because that's kind of how it breaks down with us.
Yeah.
Like I'm like I am so like yes that I go like me and a half, and you are so like no, that it's like, I absorb your I take over some of your for the yes. I actually find I'll tell you truthfully, I find EVP to be, with the exception of personal experiences, I find EVP to be the most compelling type of technological evidence that there is, and I think it's largely because it's very intimate. When you have something that's literally responding to you, and it's I don't know, I find it very very intimate, and very like personal, just
Oh, yeah.
because it's somebody's voice, somebody responding to you, someone answering you, and I find it very very compelling,
Absolutely.
especially
And
when it's not something that can be easily confused. Like when you're doing an EVP session, and you get an answer, but it doesn't fit the question. But if you're like, hey, what's your favorite color? And they say purple, well, that's really, that's not open to interpretation. Whereas, if you say, what's your favorite color? And they say,
meatball.
horses, I like yours better. Then you're kinda like, "Oh, maybe just pick something up," maybe just pick something up.
Yeah, and I as I've mentioned, I think could have been the last episode or 2, my neighbor James, shout out to James again, but I I sent him the EVPs, and it's like a projective test because the first few times I was like, "Jesus, I can't listen to the rest of this," like, I had to shut it. I'm thinking, like, "I don't even wanna bring this into my home." And he listened to it and he kept playing it and he's like, "Oh, sounds like someone's trying to tell us something." But it was like a very benign
Mhm.
type of take on it, and I just thought, "Please
Well,
stop
I
playing that."
wonder if you didn't know the subject matter of what we were talking about, whether
No,
you had it
no,
whether well,
it would
that's true. No,
it's a
that's true.
weird sound
See,
to
but
me,
see,
like,
I'm very much like him. You know what I mean? Where I don't apply kind of like an interpretation to it
we
unless
should get lunch
I
then.
can hear. Well, no, I mean, like
Maybe you'd enjoy each other's company. I don't know, because I was like, "Please stop playing that."
but I mean, like, I will say there was an EVP, when we did, I've gotten some really poignant like some really, really poignant EVPs. I got an EVP at, and now we're going down an EVP hole here, but,
As we do.
I got an EVP at, Eastern State Penitentiary probably 15 years ago, and the whole place was empty. I think there were like maybe 11 of us there. And at the time you were allowed in like 6 or 7 different places. And if you've never been, it's massive. I mean, it is a huge facility. And at the time it wasn't as well kind of the conservation on it wasn't as extensive as it is now. And so there were lots of areas that you weren't allowed. But I was afforded a certain freedom at Eastern State because I had gone so many times that it was kind of like, oh, it's Kathy. She kind of follows the rule. I'm a rule. I'm like Officer Kathy. Whatever you tell me to do, that's what I'm going to do. Um, I'm a I believe in following the rules when it comes to historic locations and just being as respectful as I can. But I had left a recorder in cell block 12, which was way hell and gone off of where the rest of us were investigating. And I just decided to leave the recorder there and we'd go back for it later on in the night. And this was so long ago that all of my technology was wired. So all of my cameras, I had to have like 400 feet of wire to get the cameras and everything like that. So to be able to leave a recorder was great because it's like not something that I need to be tethered to. And I remember we came back and we were listening to the recorders, and there was this shout that we captured, and it was a long kind of protracted shout. It was clearly a person. It was clearly a human being. And I remember being like, what is that? What is that saying? This guy looks at me and he goes, it's saying, let me out. And then I
Oh,
listened to it. And I'm like, oh my God, that is what it's saying. It's saying, let me out. And it was reverberating kind of off of the stone walls. And it was just like, let me out, like that. Now, we were there. We were the only people in the building. We would have, if someone had shouted, I mean, the whole building is designed so that people in the center of it can hear and see people every place else. So the idea is that they would have a centrally located group of guards that would be able to look down these different spiral areas and hear things, and the acoustics of the place is designed so that wherever you are you can hear stuff. We did not hear it, and this was a loud shout, but as soon as I heard it, and I just remember being like, this place has been closed for 50 years and it was in operation for 150 years. So it's like, can you imagine the kind of, the horror
oh
of
my god.
still being there, and you could say, well, it's residual. Listen,
It might not be.
I'll tell you, I investigated Eastern State Penitentiary 36 times, and I will tell you, I had a recorder there in the same place every single time, and that's the only time I got that recording. So I lean away from it being residual, but it's very. And then there was another recording the same night, and there was a young woman, and she was, I always tell everybody, be polite. You don't know why. Like, don't assume that everybody that's here is here because they were murderers or rapists or kidnappers. Some people are here because they stole a loaf of bread. You don't know. You have no idea what people's
Or
circumstances were.
because they were wrongfully
Well, exactly.
convicted,
Just be
you know?
respectful, and no matter why they're here, they did their time. Right? Just be respectful, treat them like a human being and treat them with respect. So this young woman was asking questions, and she was like, "Can I come in?" And you hear a voice very clearly say, "Come through the front door." Like that. It was like, "Come through the front door." And it was so clear. And this was, 15 years ago when the EVP recorders were, sometimes it was just magnetic tape. They were digital recorders, but it was very, very clear. And so EVPs can be very poignant, and they can be very kind of personal.
Wow.
I actually think they're on my YouTube channel, which I haven't updated, since God was a boy, but they're there if you want to check them out.
If you find the actual original clip or if you can re-download them, we should post them.
Well, I'm sure I don't have the original, but I'm sure they're on, I'm sure they're on YouTube, so we can post the link to them. And like I said,
Okay,
nobody's been to that page in I don't know how long. But these were the type
I'm
where
going.
these recordings were, you know, they weren't digital where where they were in files, so they were digital and then you had to record. But they're very, very, they're very clear.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So, we'll definitely, if we can find that, we'll find a way to link it. Moving on to something completely unrelated, and now is gonna sound so incredibly superficial, is we have some merch at Sanctum Paranormal,
Yeah.
for curious explorers, but also Sanctum Paranormal
Yes, so
had their
Sanctum
soft open.
Paranormal in Provincetown. We had a soft opening over the weekend. We're going to be open. We won't be open this weekend, but we'll be open next weekend. So, and just to give you guys ideas of dates, today's Friday the 13th. By the way,
Cool.
today is Paranormal in Asbury Park's 17th birthday. I opened it 17 years ago today.
I
Um,
love it.
yeah, big party. There
Woo,
is absolutely not a big party, but if you are in Asbury Park,
party of one.
so yeah, party of one. If you're in Asbury Park tomorrow, we are going to be at Wild Air Brewery on Main Street because Johnny Neutrino, who works for Paranormal, his band is playing there, so we're going to go there as our kind of
Oh, awesome.
our,
I wish I could
our
go.
party. Me too. I wish
I don't have
I
a
wish
sitter.
I didn't think of it until like last night. Um,
I would go, but I wouldn't stay overnight at Paranormal.
Yeah,
So,
she's a
that's actually
chicken.
the other
She's a
issue.
chicken because
Sorry,
she's pissed off the demons that are there, and she just leaves them for me to, you know,
to wrangle.
yeah, I've the demon wrangler that I am. Um,
Oh my
but
god.
Sanctum will be open and will be open for the rest of the year. I will tell you, the place looks amazing. And
Oh my god.
total shout out to Adam and Ben Berry who did the heavy lifting on how the place looks. It's got this like I don't know, this like underground urban vibe. I don't know. It's very, really cool. When I went in, I was very happy with how it looked. And the museum is being built out, and that's going to take another couple of weeks. And I think our first exhibit is going to be dolls, dolls, dolls. So I'm going to be bringing some of the dolls, including Mudcap. So if people have been excited to see Mudcap, they're going to be able to see Mudcap there. We're going to bring Bob the doll. Bob the doll is from Penhurst. Um, and Bob the doll is I'm going to send you a picture of Bob the doll so you can see what he looks like. Bob the doll is wonderfully named, but really, that's like someone keeping it really on the DL. Like I'm just Bob the doll. But Bob the doll is so creepy. Um, but yeah,
I will post a photo and
yeah.
let me
I'll send it
send
to you.
me a
I actually
picture.
just pulled one from you met Bob the doll at the investigation we did on May 1st.
I
He's like
probably
a Cupid
blocked
doll.
it
He's a
out.
giant Cupid doll from
Ugh.
he's just looks so disturbing. But but he's from Penhurst, so there's a lot, there's a lot of activity around Penhurst Asylum. And I did my lecture to bring us
Yay.
all up on it.
Yeah.
I did my lecture or I did my talk. I don't think I think lecture would not be it's not a fair assessment of it at the New Jersey History and Historical Preservation Conference in Burlington, New Jersey. I did that last week. So that was a lot of fun. I was really glad to be invited to do that. On paranormal tourism as a methodology for preserving historic sites. Real catchy title.
I'm sure it was enthralling.
Yeah, and so well received by the historians.
And that's what it's really all about.
Yeah, it's all about it's all about.
So, Kath, what do you congratulations.
Thank you.
What do you have for us today?
So we were actually supposed to do this a couple of days ago, and then I had an unexpected migraine as
A
opposed
demonically
yeah,
inflicted
exactly,
migraine.
as opposed to planned migraines. Um, so I actually chose to do something because we were supposed to do this on June 10th, and June 10th is the anniversary of the execution of Bridget Bishop, who was the first woman hanged as a witch in Salem, Massachusetts. So I try always to commemorate the deaths of the women and the men. There were several men. But Bridget Bishop is always kind of a touchstone because she's very indicative of who was targeted in the witch trials. And or at least in the beginning, she was kind of an easy target in the beginning. So I thought we would talk a little bit about her and kind of the lasting impact who she was as a person. There was 19 people hanged as witches. 21 people actually were executed. 19 of them were hanged, and then there were upwards of another 100 people who died from malnutrition and from kind of diseases and whatnot that they got from being imprisoned for a very long period of time. Um, but Bridget Bishop she's like iconic, you know. There's I would say that there are several people, and obviously they were all victims, but there are certain people who are really representative, and I would say that Bridget Bishop is one. I would say that Rebecca Nurse is another, but Bridget Bishop was the first person from within her own community who was hanged. I mean, you know, this was up close and personal. These people knew each other. So she was targeted, and she was the first person executed on June 10th in 1692.
I think it's an incredibly compelling, real. I mean, it's not even a story; it's a historical
Yeah,
event.
yeah,
That's
and it's only because almost immediately people understood what had happened there. Almost immediately, like within the first 10 years, people understood what had happened there. So we have a lot of information about these people that we probably wouldn't have in another situation. And for example, Salem is not the only place that had, you know, witch trials. There was supposed witch trials in New Jersey, although there's some evidence that was Ben Franklin pulling our leg. But there certainly were one or two. And then, you know, in Europe, there were literally hundreds of thousands of people who were murdered for suspicion of being a witch or conviction of being a witch. And you know, spoiler alert, none of them were witches. In fact, one of the things that I always say when I talk about the Salem witch trials is when you go to Salem now, witches are everywhere. And the iconography of witchcraft and all of that is everywhere. And people are very invested in it. And I always think it's a very delicate line that we're walking, because these people died rather than be thought a witch. You know, they literally, every single person who was executed because they refused to acknowledge or to admit that they were witches, because they weren't. Um, every single person who did admit to being a witch, none of them were hanged. So
what happened to them, though, because I don't imagine that was great either.
no, it wasn't, but they weren't, you know, you know, of course, none of it was great,
Mm.
but none of them had any lasting impacts from it, with the exception of Philip English, um, and mainly because people stole their land and people stole their goods and things like that. And certainly, uh, but I don't think any of them that admitted to being a witch, I don't think any of them died. So if you were very, like, there's a line in Miller's play. Why can't I think of what it is? Arthur Miller's play, um, where you know, he takes a lot of liberties. But John Proctor, who's the main character in The Crucible, thank you. And they ask him why, you know, his wife is essentially saying, just sign the paperwork, just say it's either his wife or his friend saying, just say it, because if you say it, you'll be, you know, you won't be hanged. And he said, I can't say it because it's my name and I only get one name. You know, and the importance, like, I can't say it because my name is who I am. And you see these people, and you know, we kind of intimately know them because of Miller's play, but there's been an enormous amount of scholarship done on the Salem witch trials. And what's amazing to me particularly about Salem, as an historian and as someone that does think that history just keeps giving, like, you never fully know, they are still finding new things in Salem. And they recently, within the last 8 years, found Gallows Hill. And they, you know, for 250 years, no one knew where the witches had been hanged, or excuse me, where the women had been hanged. And then they found it. Somebody, I think, was doing their doctoral, you know, it was their dissertation, and they actually found it using you know, technology and scouring diaries and whatnot. And now there's this amazing memorial there. But the first person who was accused, or the first person who was hanged, was Bridget Bishop. And Bridget Bishop still very much, both figuratively and some say literally, haunts Salem to this day. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about her.
Yeah, I think it sounds great.
All right. So the Salem Witch Trials are a big part of United States history, and even though they were before we were the United States, they were the first really, really big criminal case and trial and court case um, on American soil by Western Europeans. So they loom large. They're a tale of mass hysteria, fear, and I think a lot of people would say injustice. And at the very center of the story, and certainly in the beginning, stands Bridget Bishop. She was the first person executed during the months of 1692. Salem Witch Trial did go into 1693, but the executions were all in 1692. Her name has echoed for centuries, cloaked in accusations, controversies, and mystery. Today, we peel back the layers of myth and fear, and we're going to look at who Bridget Bishop actually was as a person. Why was she targeted? And what does her story reveal about the deeper truths about colonial America and the dangers of unchecked belief, or some would say faith? So, who was she? Bridget Bishop was born Bridget Playfair in England around 1632. So, right away, that tells you she was 60 years old when she was hanged. Like, we have this idea that all of these people were either, decrepit old people or very, very young. And especially if we look at the Crucible, the ages are all over the place. Arthur Miller took a lot of poetic license to kind of make that story. And so when we look at who the actual people are, we see where people were in their lives. And to be 60 years old in Salem in 1692, people think that life expectancy was so much lesser. It wasn't really. It was not unusual for people to live to be 70 or 80 years old if they made it past their 20s. So you had a lot of people dying before the age of 30, especially women in childbirth, and the infant mortality rate. So that made the average lifespan look very low. But if you made it past your late 20s and your early 30s, it was not unusual for someone to live into their late 70s or early 80s. We don't know a whole lot about her early life. But we do know that sometime in the mid 17th century, she crossed the Atlantic seeking a new life in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. She was married 3 times. Her final marriage was to Edward Bishop. He was a tavern keeper and a sawyer in Salem town. And what that is, a sawyer is literally someone, if you have a felled tree, he goes in and he saws it down for you. And he'll cut, your firewood. It was an important job because firewood was like the currency of a place like Salem. And you have Salem Village and you have Salem Town. Salem Village, which is very much where most of the things that we think of when we think of Salem happened. And that is actually a place called Danvers, Massachusetts right now. And Salem Town is what we think of as modern Salem. However, unlike many women of her time, Bridget did stand out. She owned property herself. She ran a tavern. She dressed in bright, even somewhat scandalous clothing, and she was very well known for wearing a red bodice. Now, people have this idea that the Puritans only wore black and white, but that's not true. They wore many, many different colors. But red was, red was a little flashier than even they were willing to put up with. She was outspoken. She argued with her neighbors, and she didn't fit into this kind of demure kind of mold of what we think of as a Puritan wife. Honestly, a lot of them didn't. And the idea that she ran a tavern and there was shuffleboard in the tavern, so that was a little scandalous too, because there was shuffleboard was competitive, and as far as the church elders were, I shouldn't say church, they wouldn't have called themselves a church. As far as the elders of the community would be concerned, that would be like gambling, if it was a little bit too competitive. And so the traits would follow her and essentially haunt her when Salem turned on its own. Now, so Bridget lived um, in Salem town, not in Salem village. So she actually had a tavern in the town. It was a little bit more cosmopolitan. It was economically active. And despite the physical distance, which is only about 5 miles, she had many longstanding ties to many of the families that were involved in all of the trials. And her name had, and this is very important, her name had already surfaced in court documents long before 1692. So in other words, people were keeping their eye on her long before these girls started to have fits in 1692. So to understand Bridget's downfall, we need to understand kind of the climate of Salem in 1692. Salem Village was a community that was gripped by anxiety and had deeply, deeply rooted internal feuds. There were people that just were constantly at each other. They had harsh winters. They had lots of threats from Native American raids. There was political instability. I mean, the governorship of Massachusetts was being called into question. In fact, there were people in England trying to stop the king from essentially removing protection from Massachusetts and just saying you're on your own, because they definitely wanted to be protected by England, but they didn't want to be ruled by the governor that they didn't have a choice in. There was lots of longstanding land disputes, and so essentially there was this pressure cooker of resentment that was going on in Salem Village, and of course the religious climate added to that tension. The Puritans saw the devil not as a metaphor, but as an active force seeking to corrupt people, and to destroy. And they also saw themselves as being super important in God's eyes. So it was like, if the devil's coming for anyone, he's coming for us. Like, we're the ones, right? We've got the bullseye on us, and so they really saw themselves as being targeted by the devil. And the devil was a real thing and a real person, or a real being. Their minister at the time was a guy named Reverend Samuel Parris, and he was really fire and brimstone. He brought a lot of these sermons that was all about evil and all about the devil and all about fighting the devil to a community that was already on kind of tenterhooks. They were already very they were very sensitive and very easy to kind of click off and start fights and arguments. So it's interesting that it's the young girls in his household, in his specific home. It's his daughter, Betty, and his niece, Abigail. So his daughter's Betty Parris, his niece is Abigail Williams. They're the first ones that begin to exhibit strange fits and start to accuse neighbors of bewitching them. And then the town, it takes off like wildfire, and the town quickly just becomes panic-stricken. The accusations spread with unbelievable speed. Initially, the accused were, initially the people that they accused were the low-hanging fruit. So they were vulnerable people, the marginalized. But soon the net widened, and anyone could become a target. Bridget Bishop was an easy target because her name was resurfacing at a time when the court system was desperate for convictions and the community wanted clear enemies to blame. So Bridget was arrested in April of 1692 after being named by several of the afflicted girls because she wasn't someone that anyone was going to stand up and defend, right? I'm sure they'd heard their moms talking about her. I'm sure they'd heard their dads talking about her, and maybe not in exactly the same way, but in a way that would lead them to believe that she wouldn't be a protected person. The charges against her were bizarre and terrifying. Allegedly, her specter, which would be her kind of spiritual person, appeared to them, pinched them, choked them. Now, when they talk about pinching could be anything from like what we think of as pinching to hitting someone over the head with a fire poker. It was just kind of a catch-all phrase that was used for physical abuse. She choked, according to them, she choked them. She threatened them with death. One girl claimed that Bridget's ghost tore her Bible to pieces. Others said that they saw her spirit on rooftops or lurking in their rooms at night. She became the boogeyman.
Mm.
These weren't physical accusations of direct action. They were spectral evidence, which anyone that's ever heard tell of Salem knows that spectral evidence was a big and very controversial part of it. Uh, and spectral evidence was a form of testimony that claimed that the spirit or likeness of a person, rather than their physical body, committed a crime. Today, obviously, we would say no. Let's throw that out. But in 1692, it was very, very serious. The judges, including Chief Justice William Stoughton, accepted it as legitimate. Other neighbors came forward to say that Bridget had bewitched their children or caused the sudden deaths or illnesses. One man claimed that she caused his cat to speak in human words. Another said that she caused his oxen to collapse in the field. And when the midwives examined Bridget for witches' marks, they claimed to find a suspicious growth in her body, often interpreted as proof of a pact with the devil. Many of these accusers had personal or financial conflicts with Bridget Bishop, but logic and fairness had no place in Salem. The court was looking for an example, and Bridget, who had already been accused twice of witchcraft in the past years, was the ideal scapegoat, because not only had she been accused, now they could be like, see, we should have done this years ago, right? And when they talk about those witches' marks, a lot of times they were marks that were left over after women had gone through childbirth, if there was any kind of rupture or any kind of scarring or anything like that. From time to time, those things could be accused as a witch's mark. Also, like a wart, if it didn't bleed, they would say it was the mark of the devil. Um, you know. Now, so her trial and her execution. Bridget's trial took place before the newly established Court of Oyer and Termine, which was a tribunal created specifically to deal with the witch crisis. Because it's hard to imagine, but this was crazy. Like, the whole town was caught up in this. This wasn't something that was happening and you heard about it. Everything in town stopped so that so that people could could focus on this and be present while these trials were happening. The court sessions were packed. There was drama, there was spiritual fervor. Witnesses wailed and cried. The afflicted girls collapsed in fits. And the judges were asking leading questions. So it was kind of like, why are you abusing these girls? I'm not abusing these. There was no way for you to get out of it. Bridget defended herself firmly and consistently. She denied all the charges and insisted on her innocence, but her prior reputation, the spectral accusations, and the political pressure on the court combined into a tidal wave that she just could not get out from under. Within 8 days of her arrest, she was convicted and sentenced to death. On June 10th, 1692, Bridget Bishop was hanged at Gallows Hill. She was the first victim of the Salem executions. She was 60 years old. Her body was likely buried in an unmarked grave, as was customary for those convicted of witchcraft. No stone bears her name, but her memory would be etched in American history. There is a stone now. It is at the memorial. There's a stone that each of them have a stone. It's really important also to remember that they say buried. They were not buried. They were thrown into a crevasse. And their bodies were barely covered. And so most of them would have fallen victim to animals,
Ew.
They didn't actually bury them. They essentially just kind of disposed of their body in a very kind of crass and casual way. Bridget Bishop was an easy target, not just for being mouthy and for being a woman with an opinion. She had lived with her husband before they were married. Like, there were lots of things that and marriage in Puritan was not religious. It was, we have a tendency to be like, oh, they were in the church. That's not how things. It was a contract. So even though it wasn't a religious thing, it still would have been seen as sinful to be living without being married, because obviously the act of sexual intercourse would have been seen as sinful. And the fact that she did that and then also had a tavern and was on her third husband, there was a lot of like, well, there's something going on with her. So why was she the first one to be executed? Well, you know, historians have actually speculated that this was a calculated decision. She was well known. She had been accused before. She stood apart from Salem's expectations for female behavior. In other words, her guilt was easy to believe. She was easy to condemn. She also lacked powerful allies. Unlike some of the later accused, she had no large extended family to rally behind her. She was a woman of means on her own, but was not a woman of influence. She represented everything Puritanism feared: female independence, sensuality, open defiance, personal authority.
Hasn't changed.
Yeah, no, it hasn't changed, and we see this all the time. But the thing about Bridget is she literally was a woman in the red dress, and they were like, "Get the
Yeah.
woman in the red dress," right? Um, some historians have also noted that executing Bridget early served as a political purpose. It gave legitimacy to the court and provided a warning to others. Once her blood was spilled, there was no turning back. Once they hanged her, because she also wasn't the other people who were accused, she wasn't destitute. She wasn't a homeless person. She wasn't a person that was she had the means to defend herself. They just weren't going to let her do it. So the legacy of Bridget Bishop, her death opened the floodgates. So over the next few months, 18 more people would be hanged, and Giles Corey, would be pressed to death with stones. Dozens more languished in prison, all because of paranoia and zealotry. Centuries later, Bridget Bishop has become a true symbol of injustice. Her stories taught in classrooms, retold in plays, documentaries, and memorialized in Salem's many plaques and ghost tours. In 2001, Massachusetts formally exonerated her and all of those convicted during the trials, just the ones that were convicted. It took a few more years for everybody else to get the all clear. But her legacy goes deeper than a legal pardon. She represents the danger of groupthink, the power of fear, the human cost of social control. She wasn't a witch. She was a woman who lived boldly. She refused to shrink back, and she paid for it with her life. Today, when we walk through Salem and see her name, we are reminded of what happens when justice is warped by hysteria. Bridget Bishop's story asks us not just to remember the past, but to question the present too. Because, like you said, it still happens. The thing
Absolutely.
about the witch trials and the why we call things a witch hunt, right? This is why we call things a witch hunt, is that it follows a formula. Generally speaking, the first people are the easy targets. They're the ones that make us uncomfortable, right? They make us question our roles in society. They're the ones that speak up a little too loudly, and the ones that make us feel uncomfortable or challenge us, and certainly challenge the powers. But let's talk a little bit about you.
Just had what people wanted. She had things people wanted, and her death probably enabled people to get some of that, I would imagine.
Well, she definitely was a person who had financial means, um, but I think more than that, she was a warning shot, particularly to women. Now, remember, the accusers in Salem were also women.
Right.
So it wasn't just these men who were attacking these women, like the whole kind of
Again,
spectrum.
still see it today.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you have these young women who are and the accusers, we have this tendency to because they call them the girls, but a lot of them were 17, 18, 19 years old. So they would have been well in a lot of them could have been
And
married.
married,
Yeah,
yeah.
they could have been married. I mean, Betty and Abigail were 10 and 11, but the other ones were, 17, 18. I think Mary, I think one of them was 20. Mercy, I can't remember her last name now, but she was 21. So, I mean, we're not talking about, they knew, they understood social constructs and things like that. Um, they also knew, they might have been jealous of her because she had power, but they also knew, if I want power, if I go after her, the people with power will be okay with that, right? Because I'm taking out someone that makes them uncomfortable anyway, you know. So Bridget Bishop's story did not end in 1692. Her spirit, whether you believe in ghost or not, so real or imagined, has become one of the most persistent in Salem's folklore. And because, it's unfair on many, many levels, but you would imagine she would be the one that would haunt because she was the one that didn't sit down. Over the centuries, dozens of accounts have emerged claiming that Bridget still walks the streets of the town that condemned her. One of the most commonly reported hauntings is at the site of the former Lyceum building, which later became a restaurant and today is occupied by a modern business. I think it was actually called Bishop's Orchard. This location on the corner of Washington and Essex Streets, which is, when you think of Salem, this is what you're thinking of, is believed to sit near where Bridget's orchard once stood. Because she made cider. That's what she served in her tavern. Staff and visitors have reported cold spots, flickering lights, disembodied voices, and even full-bodied apparitions of a woman in period clothing, sometimes with a red cloak or a bodice, reminiscent of Bridget's infamous wardrobe. Some ghost tour guides in Salem still refer to Bridget as the town's most restless spirit. Whether that's because she was the first to die or because of the injustice surrounding her trial is anyone's guess. And there was an injustice, there was a lot of injustice to go around. But her name continues to serve something in the air. As for Gallows Hill, for centuries, its exact location remained a mystery. Locals had vague traditions, but no firm evidence. And that changed in 2016 and 2017 when a team of historians and scholars from Salem State University and the Gallows Hill Project finally confirmed the actual execution site, a rocky ledge at the base of what is now Proctor's Ledge. Proctor is John Proctor, at the intersection of Boston Street and Pope Street. No memorial had marked the true site until that discovery. And in 2017, the city of Salem unveiled a quiet, tasteful monument honoring the 19 people executed during the trials. It truly is a beautiful memorial. It really, really is. Including Bridget Bishop. It's nestled behind a Walgreens parking lot. It's in the middle of a neighborhood. It's modest, it's solemn, it's surrounded by trees. It probably looks similar to what it looked like at the time. The names are etched in stone. And it's a reminder that history, no matter how deeply it's buried, eventually will come to light. And sometimes even the dead are given the truth that they were denied in life. Bridget Bishop was the first to die. Unfortunately, she was not the last. Her name lives on, not in shame, but in defiance. There's lots of people who come to her defense now and say, this is why, because she lived this way. And even when you read some of the things that she, some of the testimony, she was obviously not, she was not a wallflower. And as we tell her story today, we don't just honor her memory, but obviously the countless others who were silenced for stepping outside the lines. So this has been kind of a deep dive into one person, and mainly because this is it's always around this time of year, and I always try to commemorate them in certain ways. And like I said, they're all victims, but some of them, their stories are a little bit deeper, or we have a little bit more knowledge. And so certainly Bridget Bishop, and certainly Rebecca Nurse, who will be in the next group that gets executed. They're incredibly divergent people. Bridget Bishop was kind of like the sexy, outspoken, stand your ground woman, single, all the single ladies of Salem. And Rebecca Nurse was every single thing that the Puritans thought was right. And she still, in this very quick period, these young women became so powerful, and this fever became so powerful that they weren't just targeting kind of the outsiders anymore. They were targeting the pillars of the community to show how powerful they were. At our in the museum in Asbury Park, one of the first pieces that I hung up when I went in there was a newspaper from a London newspaper from 1693 that actually is advertising a book written, or a pamphlet written, about the Salem witches. They didn't call it the Hysteria because they believed it was true. But it's one of the only contemporaneous pieces of anything that I've seen kind of in the wild. And that's something that I'm super proud to have, is this broadsheet newspaper, because it's from that actual time. Um, but but Bridget Bishop is definitely one of those people in American history that doesn't get spoken about enough, but is still inspiring historians to go back and reinterpret the history to learn a lot more about it. And apparently, she is still seen in Salem, and I don't know if that's because of the guilt, um, the generational guilt of what happened in Salem, or because her spirit literally, you know, has not yet found rest. I hope it's the latter. I hope it's not. Or I mean, I hope it's the former and not the latter. But but that's the story of Bridget Bishop.
That was a uh, great choice for today, Kathy. So interesting, such a compelling and tragic piece of American history. And as we've talked about many times, this has been reenacted in various different ways throughout history. This type of phenomenon. It's important to keep history alive and learn from it. So thank you for sharing that.
Oh no, I'm glad. I'm glad to. When we had
It's
talked
a really good one.
on June 10th, I was like, ooh, and I think it's interesting too, like, we're not just paranormalists. We're not just, I am a historian, you're a psychologist. And like, so there's broader things for us that we explore. And the unique thing about Salem is that it is representative of so many other things,
Oh my God.
so it's its own moment, but it also allows us to then look at so many other things in history, because it's manageable. It's manageable. But one of the things that I always found really interesting about the city of Salem, if you go back, if you go to visit there now, and I know you really want to, and
I do. I
I'm
do.
going to
I
be there
want
in
us to go.
November with Adam. The first week in November with Adam, he always does a Halloween afterglow there. I will not ever go in October because it's insane. But it welcomes lots of questions and lots of kind of discussion because the ethics of paranormal investigating and things like that. But they knew immediately what had happened. So when you go there, 1692 happens. There's a memorial from 100 years later where people are like, we really need to acknowledge that this happened. And then there's another memorial 50 years later. And then there's another memorial 50 years after that. And there's no tourists coming to, Salem in 1892. There's no one going there to do that. So it's these people, the families, the descendants who are still having this generational, not just guilt, but this, like, we can not forget that this happened. And and right up until like 2017, there's a beautiful memorial that was placed there in 1992 on the 300th anniversary, and it's a really beautiful memorial. But this horror show of what happened is one of the reasons why Salem is one of the best preserved villages in American history. Even though you're going to the place where the trials were, but you're not really going to the place where the witchcraft really happened. And if you go to Danvers, which is what Salem Village is called now, they have this beautiful memorial too. And if you go to the Rebecca Nurse house, now remember, none of these people were buried, and Puritans did not believe in hallowed ground. So it's not like, there was proper burial, respectful burial, but there was no such thing as hallowed ground. But I remember this great quote after Rebecca Nurse, after she was hanged. There's this culvert that's by Gallows Hill that used to be a little creek, a little stream, and now it's different because they've built the city up, and so you can see the vestiges of where it was. And under cover of darkness, her sons snuck up to Gallows Hill to find their mother's body, to bring her back and bury her respectfully somewhere on the ground. And they had to do it and hide that they were doing it because they could be called out on. I mean, and think of how far afield you have gone, how far off the mark you are of decency when a son has to hide that he's burying his mother's body and that no one knows where she is. I mean, they do have a stone in the house, by the house now. Her house has been preserved, but there's no evidence that she's actually buried there because they didn't take any chances as far as where she would be buried. So, it's I highly recommend people going there. It's kind of like Gettysburg to me, where it's like they immediately understood the importance of this history and started to preserve it, even if it was accidental preservation. Um, it's also, I mean, if you liked Hocus Pocus, you can go see the Hocus Pocus. But it's very, very beautiful. And it's one of those things where you're like, is it okay to be excited to see it? And when I look at it is, it was a horrible thing. It was a horrible thing, but the preservation and the understanding of it is beautiful. The
Yeah.
idea that for generations people just said we have to understand this. Right up until Miller writes The Crucible in the 1950s to kind of showcase what McCarthyism was. And I would argue that we
We're
should
due for
read
another.
we might want to reread The Crucible a couple of times.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was good to, it was very timely, and I'm glad that we were able to talk about her.
Yeah, definitely a great choice. Kathy, I really enjoyed your, I was gonna say presentation today,
Deep dive.
your deep dive.
It's a
Um, yeah, and we wanna hear what you all think, and, let us know what topics you would like us to cover as well. Um, and let's keep in mind any anniversaries, any
Yep.
important dates coming up. I usually don't think along those lines, and I should.
Well, and
Uh,
also remember, it doesn't have to be ghosts. It doesn't have to be ghosts. It doesn't have to be. It can be pretty much anything that you're curious about. Because I guarantee you, if you're curious about it, Tracy and I are curious about it.
absolutely.
So, you know, uh, yes, there is a haunting component to this, but I always like to say, like, history haunts us in ways that ghosts don't.
Oh,
And anything you guys are
absolutely.
interested in, yeah. But
Tell a
but if you can
friend.
review us, especially review us anywhere, but on Apple, on Google, any place that you can review us is going to help us. So and we would love to hear from you. So quit sitting there quietly in the back. We see you in the back. All right. So let us know what you think, and
And
uh
share your scary stories
yeah,
because
please.
we'll read them.
Yeah, please.
So,
Spook me
uh,
out. I
yes,
want to get scared.
and, until next time, of course, as always, stay curious.
And keep exploring, lovelies.
Bye for now.
Bye, guys.
I know that the paranormal is real. Listen.
You've just listened to the Curious Explorers podcast with the Kathy Kelly and Tracy Stein. If you enjoyed the episode, remember to like, share, follow, leave us a comment, let us know what you think. And of course, until next time, stay curious.
The paranormal is real. It is real. The paranormal is real. Is it? The paranormal is real. It is real.